July 20th, 1402. Near the city of Ankara, in central Anatolia. By the end of this single day, something happens that has never happened before in the history of the Ottoman Empire, and will never happen again. A reigning Ottoman Sultan is captured alive on the battlefield. The man who captured him was Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, a Central Asian conqueror who had already carved out one of the largest empires on earth, stretching from India to Persia. The man he captured was Sultan Bayezid I, nicknamed Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, the same sultan who, 6 years earlier, had crushed the last great crusade of medieval Europe at the Battle of Nicopolis. Here is the detail that makes this defeat so much stranger than most. Bayezid wasn't beaten by a rival Christian power, or by internal rebellion. He was beaten, in large part, by his own soldiers switching sides in the middle of the battle. Before we go further, everything in this video is drawn from documented history, contemporary Timurid, Ottoman, and Byzantine sources, and the work of modern historians of Central Asia and the Ottoman Empire. Some parts of this story, particularly what happened to Bayezid after his capture, have been heavily exaggerated by later European writers. We will separate that legend from the documented record clearly. This is the Battle of Ankara, 1402. By the start of the 15th century, Bayezid I had spent over a decade expanding Ottoman control aggressively across Anatolia, absorbing a series of smaller Turkish principalities known as beyliks, regional states that had previously ruled their own territories independently. Many of the displaced rulers of these beyliks fled east, to the court of Timur, seeking support to reclaim what Bayezid had taken from them. Timur, meanwhile, had already built an enormous empire of his own through decades of relentless campaigning, from Central Asia through Persia and into northern India, where his forces had sacked Delhi in 1398. By the early 1400s, his attention turned toward Anatolia and the growing power of the Ottoman Sultan on his western frontier. Tensions between the two rulers escalated through an exchange of increasingly hostile diplomatic letters, a documented pattern in the historical record, though the exact, colorful wording attributed to these letters in some later retellings should be treated with some caution, since diplomatic correspondence from this period was often dramatized by chroniclers writing after the fact. In 1402, Timur invaded Anatolia directly. Along the way, his forces besieged and captured the city of Shivas. Several sources describe brutal treatment of the city's garrison following its surrender, including reports that a portion of the defenders were killed in a manner intended as calculated terror against future resistance. The precise details of what happened at Shivas are debated among historians working from sources that don't fully agree, but the broader pattern of Timur using deliberate, exemplary brutality during his campaigns is well documented across multiple conquests, not unique to this one city. The two armies met at Ankara on July 20th, 1402. Estimates of troop numbers vary significantly across sources, as is typical for battles of this era, but modern historians generally place Timur's forces at somewhere in the range of 140,000 to 200,000 men, against an Ottoman army estimated at somewhere between 85,000 and 120,000. The battle turned less on raw numbers than on loyalty. A significant portion of Bayezid's army was made up of Turkic and Tatar troops, along with soldiers drawn from the very Anatolian beyliks Bayezid had recently conquered, men whose loyalty to the Ottoman Sultan was, at best, recent and uncertain. During the battle, large numbers of these troops defected to Timur's side, in some cases turning directly on their Ottoman commanders mid-battle. This mass defection catastrophically weakened Bayezid's position at the exact moment he needed his full army intact. Notably, not every part of Bayezid's army broke. His Serbian vassal contingent, led by Stefan Lazarevic, the same Serbian prince who had fought for the Ottomans at Nicopolis 6 years earlier, reportedly fought with distinction and loyalty throughout the battle, a detail multiple sources agree on even as the broader Ottoman army collapsed around them. By the end of the day, Bayezid's forces were overwhelmed. Bayezid himself was captured by Timur's forces, the first time in Ottoman history a reigning sultan had been taken prisoner on the battlefield, and an event that sent shockwaves through the Islamic and Christian worlds alike. Now, here is where fact and legend genuinely separate, and it matters for this story specifically. Legend, a famous and widely repeated story, popularized centuries later in European literature, most notably in Christopher Marlowe's late 16th century play about Timur, claims that Timur kept Bayezid imprisoned in an iron cage, displaying him as a trophy and using him as a literal footstool to mount his horse. This image has become one of the most enduring popular details of the entire episode. Fact: modern historians treat the iron cage story with significant skepticism. It does not appear reliably in the most credible near-contemporary sources, and many historians consider it a later embellishment that grew in the retelling across subsequent generations of European writers, eventually solidifying into popular legend well after the actual events. What is documented with more confidence is narrower. Bayezid was held as Timur's prisoner following his capture, treated by most accounts with a degree of formal respect appropriate to his rank, while remaining, unambiguously, a captive with no path back to his throne. Bayezid died in captivity in March 1403, roughly 8 months after his capture. Accounts of the exact circumstances of his death vary across sources. Some suggest illness, others suggest despair or possibly suicide, and modern historians generally treat the precise cause as uncertain rather than settled fact. Timur did not attempt to conquer and permanently annex Ottoman territory himself. After his victory, he continued campaigning briefly in the region before turning his attention eastward again, and he died in 1405 while preparing a major military campaign against Ming China, a campaign that never took place. With Bayezid dead and no clear single successor, the Ottoman Empire collapsed into over a decade of civil war among his surviving sons, a period historians call the Ottoman Interregnum, lasting roughly from 1402 to 1413, as rival claimants including Suleiman, Musa, and Isa Chalebi fought each other for control of what remained of the fractured Ottoman state. So, did Ankara actually crush the mighty Ottoman Empire, as the title suggests? In the most immediate sense, yes, dramatically and undeniably. No Ottoman Sultan had ever been captured before, and the empire spent the following 11 years fighting itself rather than expanding outward, an unmistakable, documented collapse of central Ottoman authority. But here is the twist that makes this story more interesting than a simple story of Ottoman collapse. Mehmed Chalebi, one of Bayezid's sons, ultimately won the succession war in 1413, reuniting the fractured Ottoman state under his own rule as Sultan Mehmed I. Within a single generation of the interregnum ending, the Ottoman Empire had not just recovered, it had resumed the same expansionist trajectory that had defined it before Ankara. By 1453, just 50 years after Bayezid's catastrophic capture, his great-grandson Mehmed II would achieve what Bayezid himself had failed to accomplish, the conquest of Constantinople itself. Timur's own empire followed a very different path. Despite winning arguably the single most devastating victory of his career at Ankara, Timur died just 3 years later, in 1405, and the vast Timurid empire he had built through decades of campaigning did not hold together in the way the Ottoman Empire eventually did. It gradually fragmented among his descendants in the decades that followed, never again achieving the scale of unified power it held at the moment of the Ankara victory. So here is the real irony sitting underneath this story. The empire that was supposedly crushed at Ankara went on to conquer Constantinople and dominate large parts of 3 continents for the following 5 centuries. The empire that delivered the crushing blow fractured within a generation of its own founder's death, and never achieved anything resembling that same lasting global reach. Ankara wasn't the end of Ottoman power. It was, in hindsight, an 11-year interruption in one of the longest and most successful runs of state survival in world history, while the very empire that inflicted the interruption turned out to be far more fragile than the one it had just defeated. The lesson underneath the drama is a hard one to sit with. The most decisive single-day military victory in someone's career doesn't guarantee their legacy will outlast the empire they just conquered. Sometimes it's not the army that wins the battle that shapes the next 500 years of history. It's the one that loses, recovers, and simply outlasts everyone who beat it. This has been the Battle of Ankara, 1402.